Hello, hello, and good morning. This is Pablo with Meditation Amsterdam. We just received the new Corona rules. It is today, the 14th of October, and yesterday the Prime Minister went out there to say how this thing is going to get under control. So we're going on semi-lockdown again. Happy days. Anyway, back to our normal routine. I've started now with these videos again. This is like the fourth in a row that I make. I really like this pace. I'm really enjoying myself, and there's been a lot of accumulated knowledge and thoughts and things that I wanted to share. So I thought I could start recording again. So here we go. Now, a couple of days back, I presented a certain picture of why it is very difficult to become self-realized, and even more difficult to attain full enlightenment. And I explained it in with the analogy of a little whirlpool, and explaining how a human being is kind of like a whirlpool in the water, in the sense that it is a pattern in the water, which, when it becomes complex enough to have a brain, develops, in this case, a whirlpooly type of brain that can only think whirlpooly thoughts. And because it's a whirlpool brain thinking whirlpool thoughts, it has an enormously difficult time realizing that its true essential nature is not that of the whirlpool pattern, but it is actually made out of water. And so we as human beings are in a similar predicament, because everything in our experience, so let's get into that for a second. So what does experience means? It comes from, I believe it's a Latin root, if I'm not mistaken, and it means to stand out, right? So everything in our experience tells us that there's a real world out there, that there's a me here, and that the me that is here is a human being with a certain personal history, with certain modes of thinking or way of seeing the world, with certain memories, with certain patterns of behavior. And to a degree, we try to work with that framework, and we try to improve it, and we try to make it more pleasant. But it is all done under the premise that my perception of myself is correct, and I perceive myself as this body and brain that moves around in certain ways and thinks certain thoughts, essentially, right? Now, if we compare that to the whirlpool, that would be akin to the whirlpool having a brain and confusing itself, its correct, true nature, for its whirlpooly patterns, okay? And not noticing that the underlying reality of itself is just water. And so with a human being, we have this human patterns going on of what we call our body, what we call our mind, and our thoughts and emotions. And we don't realize that our true essence, what we are essentially, is none of that, but we are conscious awareness. And so we were talking about this irony, the irony of it all, and the fact that our true essence is so close to us. It's so ubiquitous. It's so closer than close to what you are. It's your very essence. It's so essential that it is, ironically or funny enough, almost impossible to detect and realize, because you confuse yourself with all your experience, with the experience of your body, with the experience of your mind, and you give that a label and you call it me. So to realize the I, or the true essence, is a very tricky thing. So we were talking about that analogy of how a whirlpool confuses itself with its spinning pattern, as opposed to realizing that it's made out of water. And in its confusion, in thinking of itself as a pattern, it starts to think that making that pattern run smoother, faster, bigger is what is going to quench its thirst. and it is very, very thirsty. But what it is thirsty for, it's its very own essence. In other words, the moment you realize what you really are, or the whirlpool realizes what it really is, which is water, thirst immediately disappears. And yet every other effort, every other trying to spin in a certain way or at a certain speed, or trying to do, splash around as the whirlpool spins, all those attempts at trying to make the pattern do things better are, I wouldn't say doomed to failure, but utterly only postponing or dampening the fundamental or the primordial thirst for realization of your true self. So so then comes the question of, okay, so it is damn difficult to make this happen, and in fact you can't really make it happen. And then we get into like, so how is it that it happens then? How is it that I become enlightened or realize the self? And what it really comes down to in the final analysis is what you could call the general upward movement of consciousness, just seeking to level up on a constant basis. And you're caught in that, and there's not really much you can do about it. Now, it's true to say that once you've acquired a bit of an itch for these topics and a bit of curiosity, so that you would be listening to a video like this or reading books about it or engaged in certain practices, that your chances of becoming realized and eventually fully enlightened, they are dramatically enhanced. They are also dramatically enhanced through correct behavior and keeping correct company and having becoming more pure in your intent. So that the yogic practices, the meditation practices, or the type of satsang or spiritual coaching that you can receive or that you can expose yourself to, has a major impact in the way you start to become attuned to realizing this truth. Because your thinking mind cannot achieve it. First of all, you cannot think your way into it, but you also cannot through effort reach it or achieve it, because it's not an achievement. It's something that needs to click in your mind. Yeah. So so then you think to yourself, okay, well, so why bother? And in fact, there have been Vedantic teachers that tell you, stop with meditation, stop with this, stop with that. All you need to do is sit in the idea of I am, and sit in that I amness, and eventually that will unravel your entire persona. You will shed it. You become a single consciousness with the rest of the universe, if you will. And that is what you call the jnana yoga or the direct path. But that's quite a tall order. That direct path, you almost need to be of royal birth, if you will, or you need to have taken a very good birth so that some of these things already click in your mind. I have to say that has kind of been the case with me, but I have also had to put in a lot of the practical work to prime my system to understand these things. So if we for a moment let that whole approach of the direct path and the jnana yoga, which is like just be the self, sit for a while. It can work for you if you already get it. But if we park that idea for a moment, then you think, okay, what can you then do? And what you can do is take up the practices, the disciplines, the thoughts and the attitudes and the type of company around you that starts to create an environment for your mind to become receptive to the realization of your true self. You can't think your way into it, and you can't really practice or act your way into it, but you can submerge yourself in practices and company and attitudes that make it much more likely that you will realize this, that you will become self-realized. So we can talk about a few of these for a moment. So name of this channel is Meditation Amsterdam. Meditation is, for some, the primary vehicle for self-realization. And I wouldn't claim that it gets you all the way there, although some would say that you can if you make it all the way into very deep self-absorption, which is called samadhi. But even samadhi itself is not, you don't, even if you become utterly one-pointed in your mind for extended long periods of time, you snap out of that eventually, and then you're back to, if the realization hasn't clicked, you're back to square one no matter how deep you went. So that even deep sustained and very good meditators need to have the realization click for that practice to help you in becoming self-realized. That said, meditation is a royal vehicle for your mind to become receptive to the right insights. So I would absolutely recommend meditation. That's what this whole thing is about. Even if meditation fails to help you become self-realized and eventually enlightened, it will produce, I think, a host of very positive changes in the way that you perceive reality, in the way that you respond. So you become less reactive to things around you and to things within you, such as emotions or bodily sensations that make you icky. And so by all means meditate. It is a primary practice. It is as fundamental as brushing your teeth before you go to sleep at night or as you wake up in the morning. It is as fundamental as breathing. It is as fundamental as the most fundamental thing you can think about, right? So meditation is an absolute must in your life. It is a non-negotiable pillar of how to attune your mind-body system and keep it running correctly. So you must meditate. This is not even a question in my mind. Now, so meditation, primary vehicle. A lot of what it does is it dampens the thinking mind so that you have extended periods in which you sit and you are simply being as opposed to thinking or doing. And that beingness is a quality that begins to become more grounded. And there's, of course, levels of it. So it'll give you a taste for that kind of thing. And in doing so, suddenly you'll start to understand a little bit of something. And something that you can't quite put your finger on. And you go, it seems to be that I can drop the thinking. I can even drop, if I go deep enough, all awareness of my body and my sensory experience. And yet I'm still there. Whatever it is that I am, it's still there. And it happens to be very pleasant, actually. And so when you start to find that center of your being and that conscious awareness that you are. So it is a royal vehicle for realization, and it gives you a much more pleasant experience of life. Then you have bodily practices as well, of course. So that's where we get into yoga asana, right? So yoga postures, what we typically in the West call yoga. That is only one small element of yoga that prepares the body and gives you bodily awareness. It gives you what Carlos Castaneda used to call tensegrity, which is this sort of bouncy, sort of structural integrity to your body, which is coming into the fascia lines of your body. It clears out your lymph system. It cleans out. It makes your immune system work better. Makes your digestion work better. All these bodily functions start to become upgraded. The same goes for Tai Chi, right? So you are upgrading and Qigong, so energetic practices. They raise the level of your bodily functions by making your body not necessarily just stronger, but so efficient that with the same strength, it can do far, far more. It needs a lot less oxygen, at least it needs a lot less calories. Your immune system, your endocrine system just works better in general. So that your bodily vehicle being more efficient allows you to enhance your consciousness by perceiving more. and therefore it's also a very good practical foundation. That said, I think that a word of warning should go out there for people who have become extremely good yogis, right? So I see people that are amazing at bending themselves into a pretzel and doing a kind of backward bridge, which looks awfully risky and scary, and they somehow land on their feet, and they do amazing things. And they spend decades doing yoga asana and becoming enormously good at bodily practices, and yet the penny never drops. The penny of self-realization, the actual goal of that practice, which needs to be combined with study of Gita scriptures, if you will, or Vedantic texts, or yogic texts, or any text for that matter that talks about higher knowledge, if you will, that needs to be combined with meditation, that needs to be combined with correct integrity of how you carry yourself and your intent and the company that you keep. People become extremely good at yoga asana practice and never make any progress into self-realization. None. And you can see, I can see it very clearly. I've been to yoga studios. People in the West think that yoga is chicks talking softly and giving themselves 2-minute hugs and sort of bending themselves into a gooey pretzel and be. That is not what yoga is. I'm sorry, right? It looks very cool. All credit to you. It's better than doing nothing, or it's definitely, there's a benefit to it. But to call that yoga is a mistake. That is not yoga. That is asana practice. It is meant to prime your system so that you can sit in meditation for extended periods of time. That was the objective of it. And so now, if you become attached to that yoga practice and identified with it, suddenly what you've created yourself is even more body identification. You've confused yourself even more. You've gone into confusion even deeper by striving for this pose or that pose. Even though within the pose you know how to bodily release, you are still on another level, striving and feeling and striving to become a better body yogi, which is it's a terribly silly goal. I mean, bending yourself forward and having very long hamstrings cannot possibly be the path to self-realization. It is a vehicle to prime your body to be serving you correctly while you go into the deeper practices and the kind of things that bring out that aha moment. Right, so be very careful with yoga asana and confusing it for yoga and thinking that if you become really good at that somehow, and if you start talking softly and becoming what you could call a spiritual materialist, that'll get you anywhere. It'll sink you further into confusion and further into the delusion of Maya, as they call it in the yogic texts, right? So yoga asana, body practice, absolutely important. They definitely help. They have the huge risk of confusing you even more and making you become more egoic. Not in a bad way, just in the sense that you are still confused and maybe even more confused. You've just switched your confusion from saying, I'm a business guy, to the confusion that says, I'm a really good yogi. You're equally confused, and you are, let's say, gonna hit a wall. Then you have good company, which definitely helps because it reinforces a certain atmosphere. You're surrounded by people who are growing, understanding these things, explaining them to one another. I know for myself, I mean, in friendships that I have definitely pushed things forward, because ultimately your brain doesn't come up with anything on its own. It is only receiving input. And an example that I have in my life of how the constant exposing yourself from input raises your level of understanding around things has been with art. So I learned how to paint sort of on my own, and I started to make some nice paintings here and there, right? And here, I'll show you some of my stuff. This is not bragging, it's just to make a point. And so, for example, this is one of my pieces, right? This is kind of realistic, academic art. This is some of the works that I did at the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam, right? Just copying some of the Rembrandt masters and things of that kind. So, but my progress was fairly quick, and one of the reasons is I became very academic about it, but another reason is I completely drenched myself in the world of art. I had all kinds of art feeds coming in from Instagram, Facebook, I had books, and I was just really completely immersed in this stuff, just absorbing all over the place. And that did something to my brain. It primed it so that when I was creating a piece of my own, I would say like, you know what, here, for some reason that I don't know, I think an upward stroke with the black paint will look cool, whatever. And suddenly it did. And I was like, wow, how did I come up with that? It was very simple. I didn't. What I did is I exposed my brain to input, right? And I wasn't really, some of it I was analyzing very carefully. Others, I was just sort of, one picture after the next. That does something to your brain. So that, how do you solve the problem of lifting yourself up by your own bootstraps? Is by correct exposure to what you want your brain to do, right? So as opposed to saying, I'm going to try to think of myself and how to, it's like, no. What you do is you drench your mind and your senses and your perceptions with the right company, the right books, and the right practices, and that starts to morph the mind and organize it around a certain something that you want to attain or realize. The realization will come. It has no choice, right? So that's why they say that the yogic path is, on the one hand, you cannot achieve self-realization, or you cannot really work for it, strictly speaking. Nonetheless, if you pursue the path with full faith and dedication, the mind has no choice but to end up realizing the self and becoming enlightened, because you've put the elements in place. It's not the hard work and the churn and the toil. It's the fact that you have put the correct elements in place, and you've been so consistent about it that the mind has no choice but to morph into what you have drenched it in, so to speak, right? So we talked about meditation or mental practices. We talked about body practices such as yoga, asana, tai chi chuan, qigong. We talked about keeping the right company and having constructive conversations which bring angles that you couldn't think about yourself. Books is the best company you can keep, by the way, in the sense that many masters are reaching out to you literally across time. You can have a conversation with them. Their knowledge is right there. You may have to read them several times over. That also happened to me with art. I struggle with certain I read a book that told me how to do things. I followed its advice, struggled mightily. 2 years later, I read the same book. And once I had practiced enough, I thought, man, he was giving me the secret all along. I couldn't read it. Like I was blind to what this book was trying to tell me, right? And so, so this would be something that you want to cultivate is good company and good input to your brain. And so books are company, but they are falling into then the category of study. These topics need to be carefully and thoroughly studied. You are better off starting with books such as The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle, for example, or he has another one called The New Earth. You have certain books. I'm even looking through my little stack to see if there's anything that comes to mind straight away. But I think to me, The Power of Now was the starting point, because it is easy enough to understand that it gets you into this thing. If you jump straight into something like the Ashtavakara Gita, you'll read it and you go like, what a bunch of freaking platitudes, man. I mean, he's just telling me you are being consciousness bliss. Yeah, how the hell does that help me? It's like the most profound truths are in some of these Gitas. You just won't be able to understand them because your brain is still thinking on a very superficial level, so to speak. So its level of understanding needs to become deeper for the Gitas to really hit home. So that is the answer to the question of how do you become enlightened or self-realized, at least, right? It is by acquiring a consistent number of practices and exposure to input that shapes the brain into an enlightened, self-realized mind or an enlightened mind. But it is not something that you can do through effort and thinking, or that you can achieve. And it's not even something that you can look forward to, because it never comes in the future. It's a spontaneous flowering of consciousness that it's seeking always higher ground. It is inevitable. I've seen interesting things lately. I mean, I saw an 8-year-old kid playing football on YouTube the other day, which was just not, it was not normal. It was like almost like a savant had been born with the soccer shoes on, and he was doing things that would have made a Messi just looks silly, right? And that, a kid like that could not have been born 30 years ago. To me, there's a mundane interpretation to this, to say like, oh yeah, he was just exposed to videos since a very young age. Yes, but I think that there's also something to be said about what does that mean in terms of just consciousness trying to reach higher ground all the time, and these kind of things popping up, which means that you have enormous resources and chances, much better now than you did if you were born 100 years ago, or even further than that. I mean, 2,500 years ago, the Buddha came up with this stuff, and only a handful of people, kind of got it. Then 1,000 years ago, Jesus came around. He tried mightily to explain this through parables and stuff, and like, metaphors. Everybody misunderstood him, and they ended up crucifying his ass, right? So he tried to explain that he was God, realized himself as God, and that you could do that too. He'd never claimed sort of exclusiveness over I'm the Son of God. It was just misunderstood at that. But his point was, no, I have attained a level of Christ consciousness which you can also attain if you only understand what I'm trying to say here. But our language wasn't good enough back then, and our understanding was limited, and therefore these kind of topics, they were conscribed to a very small group of people. They still are, if you compare it to the greater population. But I think our access to them has become a lot wider. I tried to do my part by just putting this stuff out there, hoping that one person reads it, and who knows, things go further. And so you have a better chance of being exposed to it, and you have a better chance of understanding it, because our language and our meta language has become just better at conveying some of these ideas. So that is today's topic. Okay, so we said that self-realization was damn hard, and this is the answer on how do you then make it happen for yourself, is by creating the right conditions is the answer. So I hope that helps. That was that video. We're into half an hour now, so I guess I love to hear myself talk. All right, have a good one. This is Meditation Amsterdam, and I will come back with another video soon. Cheers.